The wind screamed across the frozen plains of HFY like a wounded animal that refused to die. Commander Thelvan pulled his thermal cloak tighter around his exoskeleton and checked his scanner for the third time in as many minutes. The readings made no sense. Something was alive out there in the killing cold, and that should have been impossible. Are you certain about these readings? He called back to his second-in-command through the howling storm. Yura moved up beside him and studied her own datapad with 4 keen eyes that narrowed against the driving snow. "The scanner does not lie, Commander," she said in a voice that carried the weight of absolute certainty. "There is a life form approximately 200 meters to the north, and its vital signs are fading fast." The Korvathi exploration team had been surveying this ice world for 3 standard rotations, and they had found nothing but snow and rock and more snow. No plants, no animals, no signs that anything could survive in temperatures that would freeze blood solid in minutes. And yet something was out there, dying, Commander. Thelvan turned to assess his team. There were 5 of them in total. Yura stood at his right side, as she always did, with her scientific instruments humming softly beneath her thermal suit. Behind her came the 2 junior scientists, whose names he could never quite remember because they had only joined the crew 6 cycles ago. And at the back of the group stood the human. Marcus Cole was his name, and he had been assigned to the constellation Wanderer as part of the Galactic Collective's Species Integration Program. Thelvan had not wanted a human on his ship. Everyone knew that humans were strange creatures, driven by emotions that no other species in the galaxy could understand. They formed attachments to things. They kept small animals as companions and spoke to them as if they were people. They wept at stories that were not even real. They were useful enough in certain situations, but they were also unpredictable, and that made them dangerous. The human said nothing now. He simply stood in the snow with frost collecting on his thermal suit and waited for orders like any good crew member should. Perhaps Thelvan had misjudged him. "We will investigate," the commander announced. "Stay in formation and do not touch anything until I give permission." The team moved through the blizzard in a tight cluster with their boots, crunching through ice that had not been disturbed by any living thing for thousands of years. The scanner led them to a shallow depression between 2 ice formations where the wind was slightly less brutal. And there they found it. The creature was small, perhaps the size of a Kovate child or a human youngling. It was covered in fur that might have been silver beneath all the ice and frost that caked its body. It had 6 eyes that were closed tight against the cold, and 4 small limbs that were curled up against its chest, as if trying to hold in the last of its warmth. It was not moving except for the faintest rise and fall of its chest that told them it was still breathing, barely remarkable. Yura whispered as she knelt down and began taking readings. This creature should not exist on this world, and yet here it is. What can you tell me about it? Thelvan demanded. It appears to be mammalian or something equivalent, Yura reported. Warm-blooded, which explains why it is dying so quickly in these temperatures, and its brain structure suggests a high likelihood of sapience. Sapience? One of the junior scientists repeated in surprise. You mean this thing might be intelligent? The readings suggest it is possible, yes. Commander Thelvan stared down at the small creature and felt nothing. This was simply a scientific curiosity, an anomaly to be documented and studied, nothing more. Its core temperature has dropped below sustainable levels. Yura continued. I estimate it has perhaps 1 hour of life remaining, and there is nothing we can do about that. Then we document what we can. Thelvan decided. Take samples and recordings, and we will analyze them back on the ship. And? The creature itself? The junior scientist asked. Protocol 7 is clear. The commander said firmly. We do not interfere with undeveloped species, no matter the circumstances, and we certainly do not remove specimens from their native environment. He turned to leave. The rest of the team began to follow, all except Marcus. The human had not moved from where he stood at the edge of the group. He was staring down at the dying creature with an expression that Thelvan could not read. "Cole." The commander called. "We are leaving." Marcus did not respond. Instead, he did something that made every Kolvati in the group freeze in shock. He knelt down in the snow and reached out with his bare hands to touch the creature. "What are you doing?" Yira demanded. Marcus did not answer her either. He simply gathered the small, shivering body into his arms and held it against his chest. The creature made a sound, a weak and pitiful whimper. It seemed to echo across the frozen landscape, despite how quiet it was, and then it pressed closer to the human, as if it could sense the warmth radiating from his body. "Cole, you will put that creature down immediately," Thelvan ordered in a voice that had commanded soldiers across a dozen worlds. "That is a direct order from your superior officer." Marcus finally looked up. His eyes met the commander's, and there was something in them that Thelvan had never seen before, something fierce and stubborn and completely irrational. "No," the human said. The word hung in the frozen air between them. "No?" Thelvan repeated as if he had never heard the word before. "You dare to refuse a direct order?" "This is a child," Marcus said, and his voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "I do not know what species it is or where it came from or why it is alone on this frozen world, but I know that it is small and helpless and afraid, and I know that it will die if we leave it here. That is not our concern. It is my concern." Marcus stood up with the creature still pressed against his chest. He had removed his outer thermal layer at some point and wrapped it around the small body. The creature had stopped shivering quite so violently, and its 6 eyes had opened just a crack to look up at the strange being who held it. "I am taking this child back to the ship," Marcus announced. "You can report me to the collective if you want, and you can throw me in the brig, and you can do whatever else your protocols demand. But I am not leaving a baby to die alone in the snow." He began walking toward the ship without waiting for permission. Commander Thelvan watched him go and felt something stir in his chest that might have been anger or might have been something else entirely. The other Korvathi looked at their commander with uncertainty. "Should we stop him?" Yura asked quietly. Thelvan was silent for a long moment. The wind howled around them, and the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, a human was carrying a dying alien child toward warmth and safety. "No," the commander finally said. "Let him go." He did not know why he made that decision. Perhaps he would regret it later. But something about the look in the human's eyes had made him hesitate. And hesitation was not something Commander Thelvan was accustomed to feeling. The airlock of the Constellation Wanderer hissed open, and Marcus Cole stepped inside with the creature still pressed against his chest. Warm air rushed over him like a blessing from a god he had stopped believing in years ago. The creature in his arms stirred and made a soft trilling sound that vibrated against his ribs. "It is okay, little one," Marcus whispered. "We are out of the cold now, and I'm going to help you." He did not know if the creature could understand him. He did not know if it could understand anything at all, but he spoke to it anyway, because that was what humans did. When they found something small and scared and alone, the inner airlock door opened and Marcus found Commander Thelvan waiting for him. The Kolvathi officer had somehow made it back to the ship before him, and now he stood in the corridor with his arms crossed and his mandibles clicking in a pattern that Marcus had learned to recognize as extreme displeasure. "You cannot bring that creature into this vessel," Thelvan said. "I already have." "Then you will remove it immediately." Marcus looked at the commander with tired eyes and shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I will not." Thelvan stepped forward until they were barely a meter apart. The Korvati was taller than Marcus by nearly half a meter, and his exoskeleton made him look even more imposing. Most humans would have backed down. Marcus was not most humans. "You are a member of my crew," Thelvan said in a low and dangerous voice. "You serve under my command, and you follow my orders, and when I tell you to do something, you do it without question. Not this time. Protocol." 7 exists for a reason, Cole, and that reason is to protect developing species from contamination by more advanced civilizations. This creature is going to die. Marcus said flatly, "What good is protection if it means death?" "That is not for us to decide." "Then I am deciding anyway." The creature whimpered softly and pressed its face against Marcus's chest as if it could sense the tension in the air. Its small body was still cold, but not as cold as before. The warmth of the ship was already beginning to help. Yura appeared at the end of the corridor with the 2 junior scientists close behind her. They had all heard the commotion and come to investigate. "What is happening here?" Yura asked. "The human is refusing to follow protocol," Thelvan said without looking away from Marcus. "He has brought a contaminated specimen aboard my ship against direct orders." "It is not a specimen," Marcus said quietly. "It is a child. It is an alien life form from an undeveloped world." "It is a child." Marcus met the commander's eyes and refused to look away. "I have been in the Galactic Collective Service for 8 years," he said. "I have followed orders that I did not agree with, and I have done things that I am not proud of because that is what the job required. But this is different." "How is this different?" "Because this time I can actually help someone." He looked down at the creature in his arms. Its 6 eyes were open now, and they were staring up at him with an expression that might have been fear, or might have been hope, or might have been something that humans had no word for. "Where I come from, we have a saying," Marcus continued. "We say that the true measure of a person is not how they treat the powerful, but how they treat the weak." "A charming sentiment," Thelvan said coldly. "But sentiment does not change the law." "Then maybe the law is wrong." Silence fell over the corridor. The Karvathi crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one spoke against galactic collective law. No one. And yet this human was standing here in a ship full of aliens and saying out loud what many of them had secretly thought but never dared to voice. "I am going to take this child to the quarantine bay," Marcus announced. "I am going to do everything in my power to save its life, and when I am done, you can report me to whoever you want." He started walking. Thelvan could have stopped him. The commander was stronger and faster, and there were 4 other crew members who would have obeyed his orders without question. But he did not move. He simply stood there and watched as the human carried the dying creature past him and down the corridor toward the medical section. "Commander," Yura said softly, "what do we do?" Thelvan was quiet for a long moment. "We do nothing," he finally said. "Let him have his quarantine bay, and let him play savior if that is what he needs to do." "And Protocol 7? "I will make my report to the collective in due time." He turned and walked toward the bridge without another word. Yura watched him go, and then looked back at the corridor where Marcus had disappeared. She had served with Commander Thelvan for 15 cycles, and she had never seen him hesitate before. Something was changing on this ship. She did not know if it was something good or something bad, but she knew that nothing would be the same after this day. In the quarantine bay, Marcus laid the creature down on a medical bed and began working. He adjusted the room's temperature controls to raise the heat gradually, because he knew that warming a frozen body too quickly could cause more harm than good. He ran scans to determine what kind of nutrients the creature might need, and he synthesized compounds based on the atmospheric data they had gathered from the planet's surface. He talked the entire time. He told the creature about Earth, and about the blue oceans and the green forests and the cities, full of people who had once looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. He told it about his childhood, in a small town where the winters were cold, but never as cold as this. He told it about his mother, who had taught him that every life had value, no matter how small. The creature listened, or at least it seemed to listen. Its 6 eyes followed him as he moved around the room, and its ears, which were small and pointed and covered in silver fur, twitched whenever he spoke. "You are going to be okay," Marcus promised. "I am not going to let anything happen to you." He did not know if he could keep that promise, but he was going to try. Hours passed. The creature's vital signs slowly stabilized. Its core temperature rose degree by degree until it was no longer in immediate danger. And somewhere in the middle of the night cycle, when Marcus was so tired that he could barely keep his eyes open, the creature reached out with one small four-fingered hand and touched his face. Marcus froze. The touch was gentle and curious, like the creature was trying to understand what he was. "Hey there," Marcus whispered. "Can you understand me?" The creature made a soft trilling sound. It was not a word. Not yet. But there was something in the sound that felt like the beginning of communication. Marcus smiled for the first time since they had found this small being in the snow. "I am Marcus," he said slowly. "Marcus." The creature tilted its head. "Ma," it said. Marcus laughed softly. "Close enough, little one," he said. "Close enough." Outside the quarantine bay, the ship hummed quietly as it orbited the frozen world below Commander. Thelvan sat alone on the bridge and stared at the stars and wondered why he had not stopped the human. When he had the chance, he had no answer, but somewhere deep in his chest, in a place that Kolvathi were not supposed to acknowledge existed, he felt something that might have been the beginning of doubt. 3 days had passed since they found the creature in the snow, and everything was different now. Marcus had not left the quarantine bay except to use the facilities and grab quick meals from the galley. He had slept in a chair beside the medical bed with one hand resting on the creature's small chest so he would wake if anything changed. The crew had left him alone. Commander Thelvan had ordered that no one was to interfere with the humans' activities in the quarantine bay, and everyone had obeyed. But Yura had noticed that the commander himself had passed by the observation window more than once during the night cycles. He never stopped. He never spoke, but he looked. On the morning of the 3rd day, the creature opened all 6 of its eyes and sat up on its own for the first time. Marcus had been dozing in his chair when he heard movement, and he was instantly awake. "Hey," he said softly. "Take it easy there, and do not try to move too fast." The creature looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, Marcus could see that there was genuine intelligence behind those silver eyes. The creature was not just alive, it was aware. "Do you understand me?" Marcus asked. The creature tilted its head in a way that reminded Marcus of a curious dog. Then it made a sound, Marcus. Marcus felt his heart stop. "Did you just say my name?" "Marcus." The creature repeated more clearly this time. It pointed one small finger at him and then pointed at itself and made a different sound. A sound that was clearly a question. "You want to know my name?" Marcus realized. "I am Marcus, and you are asking what your name is." The creature nodded. It actually nodded like it understood exactly what he was saying. "I do not know your name, little one," Marcus admitted. "Do you remember it?" The creature's expression changed. Something sad passed across its face, and it shook its head slowly. It did not remember. It did not remember anything. Marcus felt a wave of emotion crash over him, and he had to take a deep breath to steady himself. This child had been abandoned on a frozen world with no memory of who it was or where it came from. It had been left to die alone in the snow, and somehow, against all odds, it had survived long enough for them to find it. "Would you like me to give you a name?" Marcus asked gently. The creature's ears perked up, and it nodded eagerly. Marcus thought for a moment. He looked at the silver fur and the 6 bright eyes and the way the creature was watching him with such trust and hope. "How about Veth?" he suggested. "We found you on Velithix, so Veth seems fitting." "Veth?" the creature repeated. It smiled. Marcus had not known that its species could smile, but apparently they could, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Veth," it said again and pointed at itself. "Veth and Marcus." "That is right," Marcus said, and his voice cracked slightly. Veth and Marcus. The next few hours were filled with wonder. Veth learned new words at an astonishing rate. By midday, it could say more than 50 words in standard. and it was stringing them together into simple sentences. "Veth hungry," it announced. At one point, Marcus laughed and prepared some of the nutrient compound he had synthesized, Veth cold, before. It said while eating, "Snow bad and cold bad," and then Marcus came. "Do you remember what happened?" Marcus asked carefully. "Do you remember how you got to that planet?" Veth's face scrunched up in concentration. "No," it finally said. Veth remembers cold and scared and then warm and safe, and Marcus. "That is okay," Marcus assured it. "You do not have to remember right now." Marcus saved Veth. Veth said, and its voice was filled with absolute certainty. "Veth knows this, and Veth is grateful." Marcus had to look away because he did not want the child to see the tears forming in his eyes. Outside the observation window, a figure appeared. It was Yura. She stood there for a long moment, watching the human and the creature interact. Then she did something unexpected. She pressed her hand against the glass in a gesture that among her people meant respect. Marcus saw her and nodded slowly. He did not know what it meant, but he understood that something had shifted. Yura walked away without saying anything. But later that day, a package appeared outside the quarantine bay door. Inside were soft blankets and a small toy that had belonged to one of the junior scientists when they were young. There was no note. There did not need to be. Veth discovered the toy and spent the next hour examining it with fascination. "What is this?" it asked Marcus. "It is a toy," Marcus explained. "Something to play with and to keep you company." "Play," Veth repeated as if testing the word. Veth wants to play. So they played. Marcus taught Veth simple games like stacking cargo containers and sorting objects by color. Veth learned quickly, almost too quickly. By the end of the fourth day, Veth was walking on its own and speaking in complete sentences and asking questions about everything it saw. "What is that?" it would ask, pointing at the medical equipment. "What does that do?" It would ask about the air recyclers. "Why is the sky black through the window?" It would ask about space itself. Marcus answered every question as best he could. And with each answer, Veth grew more curious and more confident and more alive. On the fifth day, Veth asked a question that Marcus did not know how to answer. "Marcus," Veth said quietly, "why did you save Veth when the others wanted to leave?" Marcus was silent for a long moment. "Because it was the right thing to do," he finally said. "But the commander said there were rules." Veth pressed. "He said the rules did not allow saving Veth. Sometimes rules are wrong, little one." "How do you know when rules are wrong?" Marcus knelt down so he was at eye level with the small creature. "You listened to something inside you," he said, and he touched his chest over his heart. "We call it our conscience, and it tells us when something is right even if the rules say it is wrong." Veth placed its own small hand over its chest. "Veth has something inside too," it said with wonder. "It feels warm when Veth is with Marcus." Marcus smiled. "That is probably love, little one," he said. "Or something very close to it." Veth nodded slowly. "Veth loves Marcus," it announced with the simple certainty that only children possess. Marcus pulled the small creature into a hug. "I love you too, Veth," he whispered. He did not know what the future held. He did not know what the collective would do when they found out about this. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the small, warm body in his arms and the trust in those 6 silver eyes. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and somewhere on the bridge of the ship, Commander Thelvan received a transmission that would change everything. The collective had been informed of the Protocol 7 violation, and they were not pleased. The holographic image of Arbiter Soen filled the bridge of the constellation, Wanderer like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. The Arbiter was enormous even by the standards of his species, and his judicial robes seemed to absorb the light around them. Commander Thelvan stood at attention before the display with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression carefully neutral. He had known this moment would come. He had simply hoped it would take longer. "Commander Thelvan." The Arbiter's voice boomed through the speakers. "You have allowed a serious violation of Protocol 7 to occur on your vessel and the collective. Council demands an explanation." "I am aware of the situation, Arbiter," Thelvan replied carefully. The human crew member Marcus Cole recovered an alien specimen from the surface of Velith X without authorization. Without authorization and without interference from you or your crew. That is correct. Why did you not stop him, Commander? Thelvan was silent. It was a question he had been asking himself for 5 days, and he still did not have a satisfactory answer. "I believed the situation could be contained," he finally said. "The creature was expected to die within hours, and I assumed the humans' efforts would be pointless. And yet the creature lives. Yes, Arbiter, and it has shown remarkable signs of intelligence, and it is now capable of speaking." Basic standard. The Arbiter's expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened. "This is precisely why Protocol 7 exists, Commander," he said. "You have contaminated a developing species with knowledge of interstellar civilization, and this contamination cannot be undone. The creature was dying, Arbiter, and it was alone and abandoned on a frozen world with no others of its kind in sight. That does not matter. It was a child. That does not matter either." Thelvan felt something twist in his chest, something that felt dangerously like anger. "What does the Council intend to do?" he asked the human Marcus Cole. "Is to be detained and returned to collective headquarters for tribunal," the Arbiter announced. "The contaminated specimen is to be euthanized according to standard containment protocols and the planet. Velith X is to be quarantined for the next 50 cycles. Euthanized," Thelvan repeated slowly. "Terminated, yes. And this is the merciful option, Commander, because the alternative is to return a contaminated specimen to its native environment where it would suffer the psychological trauma of possessing knowledge it cannot use or share. The creature has a name," Thelvan said. "The human calls it Veth. The creature's designation is irrelevant, is it?" The Arbiter's eyes narrowed. "You are dangerously close to insubordination, Commander. I am simply trying to understand, Arbiter, and I am trying to understand how a law designed to protect developing species can be used to justify killing a child. Protocol 7 protects the many at the cost of the few. And that is how civilization functions, and that is how order is maintained. And if we make exceptions for every orphaned creature we find on every frozen world, then the entire system collapses." The transmission flickered slightly. "An enforcement vessel has been dispatched," the Arbiter continued. "It will arrive at your location within 12 standard hours, and you will cooperate fully with the wardens when they arrive. And if I do not, then you and your entire crew will share the human's fate." The hologram vanished. Commander Thelvan stood alone on the bridge for a long time. The stars wheeled slowly past the observation windows, and somewhere in the distance, the frozen world of Velith X hung in the darkness like a pale blue marble. He thought about his career. 40 cycles of faithful service to the collective. 40 cycles of following orders and enforcing protocols and believing that the system existed for good reasons, even when those reasons were not immediately clear. He had never questioned. He had never doubted. He had simply obeyed. And now he was being asked to hand over a child to be killed because a law written centuries ago had not anticipated that sometimes mercy might matter more than procedure. Thelvan left the bridge and walked through the corridors of his ship. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. Most of the crew was asleep during this cycle, and the ship felt abandoned and lonely. He found himself standing outside the quarantine bay. Through the observation window, he could see Marcus Cole sitting on the floor with Veth. The human was teaching the creature to stack small cargo containers into towers, and every time the tower fell, Veth would make a sound that might have been laughter's 6 silver eyes sparkled with joy. 4 small hands clapped with delight, and the human The human was smiling with a warmth that Thelvan had never seen on any face of any species. He pressed the entry button. The door slid open and both occupants of the room looked. "Up, Commander," Marcus said, and his voice was guarded. "I was wondering when you would come. You know about the Arbiter's decision?" "I can guess." Veth stood up and moved to stand beside Marcus. The creature reached up and took the human's hand in its own. "Small grip, who is this?" Veth asked. "This is Commander Thelvan." Marcus explained. "He's in charge of this ship." "Commander," Veth said and bowed its head politely. "Marcus told Veth about you, and Veth is grateful that you let Marcus save Veth." Thelvan stared at the small creature. It spoke so clearly. Now it moved with confidence and grace. It looked up at him with those 6 silver eyes, and there was no fear in them. "Only trust, only hope. You are not afraid of me." Thelvan observed. "Should Veth be afraid?" The creature asked. "Many would be, but you are a friend," Veth said simply. Marcus said the crew left gifts for Veth, and that means the crew are friends, and you are the commander of the crew, so you must be a friend too. Such simple logic, such innocent faith. Thelvan felt something crack inside him, something that had been solid and certain for 40 cycles. "The collective is sending an enforcement vessel," he said. "They want to take the human away for trial." Marcus nodded slowly. "And what do they want to do with Veth?" Thelvan could not say the word. He could not look at those silver eyes and say the word. But Marcus understood anyway. The human's hand tightened around Veth's small fingers. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "Marcus?" Veth asked with confusion. "What is wrong and why does Marcus look sad?" "Nothing, little one," Marcus said, and his voice wavered slightly. "Everything is going to be okay. The enforcement vessel arrives in 12 hours. Thelvan said, "I wanted you to know." He turned to leave, "Commander." Marcus called Thelvan, stopped. "For what it is worth, I do not blame you, and you did not make these laws, and you did not ask for this situation." Thelvan was silent for a long moment. "I have followed orders my entire life," he finally said without turning around. "I always believed that obedience was the highest virtue, and I always believed that the system knew better than any individual. And now? Now I am not so certain." He walked away before Marcus could respond. But as he made his way back to his quarters, Commander Thelvan found himself thinking about a small creature with silver fur and 6 trusting eyes. He found himself thinking about a human who had defied everything for the sake of a child. He did not know, and he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, the system had been wrong all along. The enforcement vessel emerged from hyperspace exactly 12 hours after the Arbiter's transmission. It was a sleek black ship, bristling with weapons, and it dwarfed the constellation Wanderer like a predator looming over its prey. Commander Thelvan watched it approach from the bridge and felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. 3 wardens materialized in the transport bay moments later. They were tall and armored, and their faces were hidden behind helmets that showed no emotion they carried. Weapons that could stun or kill, depending on the setting. They were the enforcers of collective law, and they had never failed in their duties. Not once in 300 cycles, Commander Thelvan. The lead warden said, "You will surrender the human Marcus Cole and the contaminated specimen immediately. Follow me." Thelvan said. He led them through the corridors of the ship, but instead of going to the quarantine bay, he took them to the main cargo hold. The doors slid open, and the wardens stopped in their tracks. The entire crew of the Constellation Wanderer was waiting inside. Yira stood at the front with her arms crossed and her 4 eyes blazing with determination. The 2 junior scientists stood beside her, and behind them were the engineers and the medical staff, and every other crew member on the ship. And in the center of them all stood Marcus Colveth, was beside him holding his hand. The small creature looked up at the wardens with 6 silver eyes that showed no fear. What is the meaning of this? The lead warden demanded. Commander Thelvan walked past the wardens and went to stand beside his crew. It means we are not going to hand them over. he said. "Commander, you are obstructing collective law." "Yes, I am." The warden's hand moved toward his weapon. "You understand the consequences of this action, and you understand that you and your entire crew will be charged with conspiracy and obstruction and potentially treason." "I understand." "Then why are you doing this?" Selvan looked at Veth. The small creature smiled at him. "Commander is a friend," Veth said. Veth knew it. Something in Thelvan's chest loosened something that had been tight and cold for 40 cycles. "I am doing this because the law is wrong," he said. "I am doing this because Protocol 7 was written to protect developing species, and yet it is being used to justify killing a child. The law exists for reasons beyond your understanding." "Then help me understand," Thelvan challenged. "Explain to me how killing an innocent creature protects anyone, and explain to me how murdering a child serves the greater good." The warden was silent. "You cannot explain it because there is no explanation," Marcus said. "There is no justification that makes sense, and there is no logic that excuses what you are about to do." He stepped forward with Veth still holding his hand. "Where I come from, we have a saying," Marcus continued. "We say that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats the powerful, but how it treats the weak." He looked at the wardens. "I found a weak creature alone and dying in the snow, and I made a choice to save it, and that choice was not logical, and it was not practical, and it probably was not wise, but it was right." "Right according to whom?" the warden demanded. "Right according to something inside me that knows the difference between good and evil." Marcus placed his hand over his heart. "You can call it conscience, or you can call it morality, or you can call it whatever you want. But it exists inside every sentient being in this galaxy, and it tells us when we are about to do something we should not do." He looked at the warden directly. "You feel it, right? Now, do you not, and you feel that small voice inside you telling you that this is wrong?" The warden did not respond, but his hand moved away from his weapon. "I am not asking you to break the law," Marcus said. "I am asking you to question it, and I am asking you to consider whether a law that demands the death of children is a law worth following." Silence filled the cargo hold. The wardens looked at each other, the crew of the Constellation. Wanderer stood firm, and Veth, little Veth, with the silver fur and the 6 bright eyes. Veth let go of Marcus's hand and walked toward the lead warden. "You are scared," Veth said softly. "Veth can see it in how you stand, and Veth understands because Veth was scared too when Veth was alone in the snow." The warden looked down at the small creature. "But then Marcus came," Veth continued. "And Marcus was warm and kind, and Marcus made Veth not scared anymore." Veth reached up with one small hand. "You do not have to be scared either," it said. "You can choose to be kind." The warden stared at that small outstretched hand. Seconds passed, then minutes, and then something extraordinary happened. The warden removed his helmet. Beneath, it was a face lined with age and marked with scars. But the eyes were wet with tears that the warden clearly did not understand. "I have served the collective for 60 cycles," he said in a voice that trembled. "I have enforced the law without question because I believe the law was just." He looked at Veth. "I do not know if I can believe that anymore." He knelt down until he was at eye level with the small creature. "I cannot guarantee what will happen next," he said. "The council may send others who are not as willing to listen. Then we will convince them too," Veth said with simple confidence. "How can you be so sure?" "Because Veth has learned something important," the creature said. "Veth has learned that one act of kindness can change everything." It looked back at Marcus. Marcus saved one small creature in the snow, and now look at how many hearts have been changed. The warden was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and turned to face his fellow wardens. "Stand down," he ordered. "Sir," I said, "stand down, and we are returning to the council with a different report than they expected." He looked at Commander Thelvan. I cannot promise you protection, and I cannot promise that the council will listen, but I can promise that they will hear what happened here today. That is all we can ask." Thelvan said. The wardens left. The enforcement vessel departed. And for the first time in days, the crew of the Constellation Wanderer allowed themselves to hope. 50 cycles later, Veth stood before the Galactic Assembly. The small creature was no longer small. It had grown tall and strong, and its silver fur gleamed under the lights of the great chamber. Six eyes surveyed the thousands of delegates gathered from 100 worlds. "I was found dying in the snow," Veth said. "I was alone and afraid, and I had no one, and then a human saved me." The chamber was silent. "He did not save me because the law told him to, and he did not save me because it was logical or practical, and he saved me because he believed that every life has value." Veth paused. "Today I stand before you as the ambassador of Velethix, and my people have joined the collective as full members because of what one human taught us about compassion." Veth looked up at the gallery where an aging human with gray hair sat watching. "I am here to propose an amendment to Protocol 7, Veth announced. "I propose that we add one simple clause." The chamber buzzed with murmurs. "When mercy and law conflict," Veth said, "mercy shall be given the weight of law." The vote was called, and for the first time in the history of the Galactic Collective, the vote was unanimous. Every single delegate raised their hand in favor. In the gallery above, Marcus Cole wiped tears from his eyes. Commander Thelvan sat beside him and placed a hand on the human's shoulder. "You changed the galaxy," Thelvan said. "No," Marcus said quietly. "I just picked up a child from the snow, and everything else followed from that." He watched as Veth descended from the speaker's platform to thunderous applause. "That is the thing about kindness," Marcus said. "You never know how far it will reach." Veth looked up at the gallery and found Marcus's eyes. The creature smiled, and Marcus smiled back, because in the end, that was what it all came down to: one choice, one act of compassion, one human who refused to leave a child to die alone in the cold, and a galaxy that would never be the same. The stars continued to spin in their eternal dance. Worlds continued to orbit their suns, but something had shifted in the fabric of civilization. Something small and quiet and powerful, the knowledge that mercy mattered, the understanding that kindness could change everything, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe was a little bit brighter than anyone had believed. All because one human found weak creature in the snow and made a choice that no one expected.